Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Musician's Mentor podcast. I'm your host, Travis Mark, and today I have the distinct pleasure of talking with my good friend and bass player extraordinaire, Jaron Gulino. Jaron is the bassist for Lynch Mob, Tantric, Heaven's Edge, the L.I.F.E Project, Dellacoma, and many more, and he's one of the most hardworking guys you'll ever meet. I met Jaron when Tantric were touring London a couple years ago. I was living there at the time, and they were kind enough to let my band do the support slots on a couple gigs. So it's funny how you meet people and these connections grow or can grow, and it kind of relates to what this podcast is about. On that note, please remember to give us a rating, a review, a follow, a share as we continue to grow and create content for you guys. But for the most part, let's get straight to it. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Jaron Gulino. Hey Jaron, it's Travis from Musician's Mentor. How you doing, man?
Hey Travis, doing great, man. Thanks for having me on the show.
No, thank you, man. I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to hearing where our conversation goes. I obviously met you very briefly when Tantric passed through London, and I was still living there at the time. And thankfully, you guys let our band open for your band, which I was always very appreciative of. And I will record a introduction on all your activities once this interview is finished. But for our listeners who don't know much about you, would you maybe just do a brief introduction as to who you are, please?
Sure. My name is Jaron Gulino, and per this conversation, I am the bass player of Tantric, Heaven's Edge, Lynch Mob, and the L.I.F.E Project, which are my current active and touring projects, among many other recording things as well. But those are the main things that I do currently.
Cool. And let's talk about your sort of involvement and your introduction to music. How did you find that music was the path that you wanted to take?
It actually came pretty late in the growing up stages of my life. As a young kid, I was a big fan not only of just listening to music, but the whole world of it. While most kids were watching Disney movies and Nickelodeon, I was like obsessing over music videos and Ozzy, and just like, to me, that was like, my kind of childish stuff, and being a fan and just growing up and going to concerts since I was a kid with my dad, and, getting into music with friends in school and stuff. It wasn't until I was about 15 or 16 when I finally decided to pick up the instrument. But I think a lot of the early stages of that was growing up around the music, being a fan, and bass playing. I was a skateboarder for many, many years and was pursuing it, with the hopes of a career of some sort. But once I kind of got a taste of that music and playing an instrument, it kind of just made me realize, if people are out there doing this, maybe I can too. And then my early teens there is when I started to see friends of mine really succeeding with their instruments, playing things like Slayer or Metallica, or things that, to me, I was really big into then, but more so the physical aspect of it, like seeing the ability to play fast, or even watching drummer friends of mine, play double bass. It was like, wow, like these kids that I go to school with that I didn't even know liked the same kind of music as I did, are out here not only listening to it also, but playing it. And that was kind of the aha moment for me. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family, that was very supportive of music. And my dad growing up, he played a little bit of bass. And, my mom was a supporter of that. So, between the two of them and getting instruments through them, kind of just spawned this career that's become a wild ride.
That's awesome, man. Let's talk a little bit about family support if you are a musician. I was also very lucky in regards to my parents. Once I kind of decided to do music. They were very supportive. I'm sure they were probably scared without telling me, but they were very supportive. And I, as I'm sure you do, I know quite a few musicians who don't seem to have that family support. What would you kind of advise up and coming musicians who maybe don't get that, I don't want to say undying support, but don't get any support from like their parents or anything like that on continuing to pursue this as a career?
Well, I think it's tricky because, when you say support, it can mean so many different things. Some families, um, that are well off, they might support their kids by funding, their career, or, just giving them what they need so that they can get the materials or the instruments and so forth. And then you have maybe families that are on the opposite spectrum, which are, they show up to every concert. They're there. They're making sure they're practiced. They're on them about that kind of stuff. But, maybe they know or have an idea that, music is a tough career, and, not everybody makes money. And even some of the hardest working people, money is a weird aspect of music. So I think it really varies, but I think if you have a loving family, that wants to love and support what you do, show them that you're dedicated, and, you got to take it seriously, just like any kind of sport or art. And I think growing up, I was always very obsessive about the things I did. I skateboarded. I lived and breathed it for many, many, many years. And then as soon as music came in, it kind of took over that same kind of feeling as an obsession. So I think, my parents, as much as they supported the fact that I loved it and got to go on these little tours growing up and got to hang with friends, I think at the same time they're thinking, okay, when you go to college or get done with that, like, I wonder what you're going to do for money. I don't think anybody really saw it necessarily becoming a full-time career. Even part-time would be something more considerable. Even me now thinking back on it, it's like, I don't know that I ever even realized that I could take it this far. But, growing up watching all those heroes of mine, that's all you ever really want. You dream of it. So in my family, my parents have been instrumental in coming to my shows and supporting, and never really pushing back. Every time I have a show or I say I'm going to go on tour, it was never like, well, okay, well, how much money are you going to make? Or are you going to be able to take off from your job? I think they trusted my judgment and to make the right choices and, to make the best of it. And I think that's what I've done. So observing that through my eyes, through friends and other bandmates, I have a lot of people that I've worked with that didn't have that support from families. And, I think that kind of a thing can be negative for sure. It can work against you. But in my eyes, I think I would use that as fuel to drive me to be better. And I think that's what a lot of people do as well. And I think anybody growing up now that's trying to do a career in music or anything, any kind of art that is kind of getting pushed back from parents, that's just their way, I think, of, being protective. But, you just gotta throw all your chips in one basket. I know that's not really the right thing to do in most eyes, but I feel like if you're going to do something, you got to commit yourself to it and give it 100%. I think any parent that sees their child or family member, really going for something and believing in themselves, it only helps to believe in them as well. And, obviously it's a slippery slope. It could go either way, but I think that's really, the strongest thing. And if you believe in yourself, do what you believe in and really just kind of go for it. And any naysayers, whether it's family or friends, it's tricky, but sometimes you just got to say, I'm doing what I know is best and, keep pushing forward. But I think every situation is obviously going to be a little different with that.
Yeah, I agree. And I like the fact that you said you could use it as fuel. I'm a big believer in that, almost like not in a malicious way, but use it as a way to prove people wrong, like
Exactly.
turn the negative into a positive at very worst,
Sure.
So now, again, I know that you play with Tantric and you play with the Lynch Mob, Heaven's Edge, the L.I.F.E Project. You're always busy. From what I see online, you're always busy. And I know that it possibly seems like something silly to talk about, but I know some musicians who can't seem to organize a piss up in a brewery. How do you sort of go about managing the logistics of your diary when working with so many different projects?
It is very difficult, especially because a band like Tantric, we tour a lot. We do pretty much 12 months worth of dates. Sometimes they're more spread out, sometimes they're more compact. But I've been in the band for over 5 years now, and every year we do anywhere from 100 to 200 shows. Even in the COVID year. So that makes it really difficult to do these other things. But fortunately for me, some of these other bands, like Heaven's Edge only plays a couple times a year. So that is, easy to squeeze in. And now that I'm doing the L.I.F.E Project, that's a little bit more demanding, when we have work to do. But, I do my best to try to finagle it or, make the dates work. But now the latest thing that I've added is Lynch Mob. And, personally for me, that is a huge, I don't want to say accomplishment, but it's very important to me. Growing up, that was the sound and the tone that I chased, and the kind of music that I've always wanted to play. So now that I'm getting a chance to do it, it's kind of taken priority over some of these other things.
Yeah.
So kind of all that is leading into the next phase, which is getting someone to cover for me while I do these other things. So I've been very fortunate to have a friend of mine in my life, Rick Reynolds, who is a fellow bass player. He's been in the game for a very long time. He's pretty much subbed in for the majority of my bands when I wasn't able to be there since, for almost the last 10 years. Even pre-Tantric, he's been helping me. So he's been a huge role in making this all happen. And I honestly can say, I don't know that I would be able to have all of these gigs still without the help from Rick. And this last year was the first time I really had to sub out some of these bigger gigs that I have. And Rick came in and did a killer job. And sounds like this year is going to be a lot more tangling of the schedules. And I think Rick is on board to help me out with that as well. But it's not easy. But, I kind of look at it as this, when you have a normal job, whether you're working a restaurant or whatever, good employees are hard to come by, right? So when you have a band, it's all about chemistry and the creation. I get that. But when you're on tour, it's a little different. You kind of are looked at as an employee. Everybody does their job every day, has their own duties to do. And I think, if you're valuable and you're a likable person, people will be happy to have you, as much as they physically can. And I think with Tantric, we're a family. I'll come in and always give it, more than 110% every single show. And, I work really hard off stage as well. So I think, anytime I can be there, they're more than happy to have me. And rather than just say, screw you, you can't do all the shows, we're getting somebody else, we make the best of the situation and we make sure that everybody's happy and all the work still gets done. And when I can be there, I can. And when I can't, I'm not going to leave them hanging with the go figure it out. I'm going to actually give them the answer, which is Rick Reynolds. It all kind of circles back to that. So I think, juggling those things is as difficult as it is. If you really want it, I think it's doable. And, not everybody is as fortunate to have a friend like I do that can do that. But there's people out there that want gigs, and I think there's plenty of work to be had for everybody. So hopefully the juggling act can continue. But for now, it's working out.
Yeah, and it seems like it's working out well. I mean, again, I follow you on the social media stuff, and it looks like everything is going great. I'm very happy for you that it's doing that, man.
Thanks, man. I'm very happy as well.
What about your involvement with bands? Again, possibly a bit of a strange question, but, Tantric's a bigger name band. Obviously, Lynch Mob is doing some really cool things at the moment. Heaven's Edge, most people who listen to that sort of genre would have heard of Heaven's Edge. I know that the L.I.F.E Project's more of a new thing for you, so I'm going to exclude them from this particular question. But when you get these opportunities, let's talk about how these opportunities to play in these bands come about. And then also, obviously you already said that you kind of obsessed with playing and you kind of got deep into it. So from a playing perspective, you're obviously at a certain level that you can do those things. But how do you mentally prepare yourself for auditioning for these types of bands when you get these calls or opportunities?
It's it's a little bit of a strange question for me because, now that I'm thinking about it, they kind of just come like out of the blue, like when honestly the night we played together in London, um, I was having a hard time getting cell service that day, and I wasn't getting any text messages, and we're sitting there playing with Tantric in England for the first time ever, and I'm sitting in that venue that we played, and I'm sitting in the bathroom, and all of a sudden my phone just started going off, like notifications of messages, and I got one online from Mark from Heaven's Edge, who's a buddy of mine from Philadelphia. And that was the night that I got asked if I would be interested in doing the Heaven's Edge stuff. And, I flew home from Europe when that trip was done, and kind of just went into the rehearsal space and jammed the songs with them to see, if one, I was the right fit, but two, if we all kind of got along. But leading into that, every day, pretty much after we played together, I was in the dressing room of all the venues that we played, learning the Heaven's Edge material, so that when I got there, it was like, okay, what songs do you guys want to do? Because I've learned, pretty much all of them. So I kind of always try to over prepare when I know I'm in that situation. But out of all these things that we're talking about project wise, I think that's the only one I really would say that I have auditioned for. Tantric, I kind of just fell into and was like, hey, can you do this gig and be here in 2 days and go on a tour for 6 weeks? And it was kind of a crazy whirlwind thing, but kind of the same thing for Lynch Mob. Was kind of just referred from a couple friends to fill in for some shows for a buddy, and then kind of got there and like wasn't even really an audition. It was like the first jam was sound check at the first show. So I think just going in and really preparing and knowing your parts and being flexible and easygoing is really key. But also putting yourself into it. Like anybody can play a song from tab or looking it up or whatever and can get through it. But the style comes into play. The emotion. It's mental and physical. And all these bands that we're talking about, they're all kind of different stylistically. So growing up playing metal and thrash and all these things when I was younger, I think really whipped me into shape to pretty much cover all these bases. And I know we kind of took L.I.F.E Project out of this question, but that's the most demanding physically of playing, because it's all right hand, picking and fast, more metal, where a band like Lynch Mob is more soulful and feel and bluesy. So I think just having that physical stamina is one thing, but also immersing yourself or like just in the actual feel of the music altogether is a whole nother thing, just kind of going there mentally and getting that smooth feel vibe, or just banging your head, whatever the style might be. You really just got to go for it more so than knowing your parts, but feeling your parts.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's all different. I approach everything differently, but to answer your question, really all it comes down to is practice. I mean, I practice almost every single day. I'm taking a little break now for the holiday for the first time in years, but I still play multiple times a week. But at any given regular time of the year, I play almost every single day. If I'm home 8+ hours a day, I'm just jamming to, whether it's a set list of a band I'm learning the material for, or just keeping my chops up, or just jamming and recording. It's just a matter of being physically ready when the time comes, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also, just to jump on your answer there a little bit as well, like just to kind of be in the role for the artist that you're playing. It makes so much sense. A lot of guys, again, can just play, but some guys look out of place, or some guys,
Sure.
you can tell they're just not into it sometimes, So it's like, that makes a lot of sense,
It's like acting and dressing the part as well. It's more than just the playing.
Very much so. So let's like completely twist this on its head. Obviously
Sure.
you're a busy working musician. I'm a working musician. Most of the people I've interviewed for this have been full-time working musicians. What if you're a young guy starting like a band? And I don't mean that in a terms of an age. I mean, the music industry's changed so much. It's not like there's 100 thousand places to play anymore. You can't just go to your local venue up the street because a lot of places don't have a venue up the street. So what
Sure.
if you're a young guy starting a band and you're trying to go about getting gigs? What would you do if you were starting all of this again? And I know it's all very hypothetical, but you're starting this again, knowing what you know, you have your know-how. What would you do to go about trying to get some gigs or join a band that is already gigging?
Well, I guess that's a two-parter because if you're joining a band that's already gigging, you want to try to take it to another level or whatever. But I think I would do pretty much what I did to start originally, and that was, when I was younger, I was the leader of the majority of my bands. And when I say leader, I don't mean I ran everything in terms of like write all the music and all that. Obviously that can be a group effort, but in terms of like the business side of things, when I was a teenager, I didn't realize that it was quote unquote business. I just thought, all right, I got to go to a place and ask if we can play there and, like figure all out the logistics. I just figured I was the guy to do that because I was a kind of a hungry go-getter kind of guy, as I kind of see myself still. But the whole point is like, you got to be willing to put in that groundwork. We did a lot of house parties and a lot of free shows in backyards and stuff like that growing up. We had a thrash band and we would rent out the School of Rock venue and, have our friends from school come down there. And, after a few months, playing for your parents and friends quickly turned into a couple hundred kids going nuts and having mosh pits to, okay, well, maybe we do some house parties in the city. And then we kind of, branch out of our little circle there a little further. And then after about a year, say, well, yeah, this was in the years of MySpace, I figured, well, the best way to really do shows outside of your market is to play for somebody else's audience. And so we would start doing show swaps. We would contact bands from cities that were nearby and say, hey, you want to come out here and play with us here, and in return, give us a show in your hometown. And that's kind of how it all started to branch out and spiderweb, if you will. And just getting in with the bands, I think, was the best because, once you win them over, if they want to have you and then, you play at their show and the promoter sees you there at their preferred club, then, the promoter knows, hey, we got another killer band that we can have here. Then the shows become your shows and so forth. So I think it's just a matter of networking and talking to people and showing your face. A lot of people want to sit at home and criticize on Facebook. No one comes out to shows. Why does anybody come see our band? Well, if you're not going out to see bands and you're not talking to people, how are they going to know about your band? It's like, it's totally just word of mouth to start, I think. And no matter how much money you put into advertising and so forth with all that kind of stuff, I think nothing is more valuable than face value. And that's going out there and talking to people and being personable. And I think that's the most important thing for bands. A million bands that I've heard have great songs, or a million, great players out there, but they don't want to talk to anybody or deal with anyone. So no one wants to deal with them. It kind of kills it before it even becomes anything. And, I'm not saying everybody needs to be, Mr. Social, but it definitely helps to have somebody in the band that can do that and is willing to put in that kind of work. And kind of like I was touching on in the previous question, it's kind of like a job when you're on tour. Everybody has their role. I feel like bands, even off tour, are kind of still like that. You got the main songwriter guy, you got the guy with the van who does all the driving and might have all the gear. You got the guy who's the ladies' man or Mr. Social or whatever you want to call it, that's getting all the friends and the girls to come to the shows to bring their friends. Like you hear in all these rock docs, and all these documentaries of bands growing up on the Sunset Strip and stuff like that. It's literally just, beating people to death with your band and making sure that people are aware. And again, being likable is another huge part of that. But, I think that's pretty much starting out what most bands can do, hone in on their craft, get good, and then figure out how to get people interested in what they're doing.
Yeah, and dude, the one thing you said there as well, it's so important. Like just talking and socializing with people, it can mean so much to somebody who's into your band and they've come to the venue to watch you, and they might not have, maybe courage is the wrong word, but they might not have the courage to talk to a band member, but they might love your band, and just by you talking to that person Man, that can create a lifelong fan, and at least in my experience, some of those people can follow you forever, and it's just
Yes.
because you took the initiative to kind of go, "Hey, thanks for coming down to the show off stage." It's like it's so small but so powerful, man.
Yeah, some of my best friends currently are people that I've met that's maybe have started out as fans or people that didn't even really know the band, but who just met at a show or whatever, and you just connect, and when you connect with people, you never know what can come of it. And I think kind of even to top on that, it's like I've gotten a lot of gigs just talking to people that didn't even know that I was even in really a band, or they never heard of Tantric or whatever it is. You just kind of it's almost word of mouth or based on again that personality or that social skill. So it can really go both ways with that.
Totally. So you've spent a lot of time and do spend a lot of time on the road.
Yes,
What's the
tons.
what's the hardest part, and what tips could you offer on trying to stay sane on the road, especially on long hauls?
I would say there's a couple things. It's obviously hard. You're dealing with multiple personalities of people, and some people are morning people, some people are not. All these kind of things that come with humanity. Um, I think the most important part is to remember what you're there doing. You're all there for the love of playing music, or I would hope so. For me, that's every day. I drive or I do all the work all day long just to get to that hour or hour and a half on stage every night. And no matter how hard of a day or how brutal of a trip or whatever it is, how mad everybody is at each other, kind of just don't think about it. You just go on stage and again, kind of like we were talking about with the fuel of people being opposed to what you're doing. Like I take anger and aggression out on the stage. The second the lights come out and we hit that first opening note, no matter which band I'm playing with, I'm leaving it all on the stage. That's what I'm there to do, and I try to never lose sight of that because so many bands get burnt out on the road and they say, I just can't wait to get home. But I've never understood that. It's like you practice your whole life to get here and do this, and you're doing it, and like you just want to go home. It's like I get that people get tired and stuff, but it's just at that point you gotta question yourself. Am I here for the right reasons? And I think the right reasons are loving what you do, and I think that gets lost in the shuffle a lot. And I think the other part of that is, people have vices. They want to numb their day. You're in a van for 23 hours driving somewhere to play a gig, and hopping out of the van and going right on stage, just make it in time. That kind of stuff is stressful and draining. And some people turn to alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, and it's not always easy to tolerate other people. So that's another reason they might do that. But might not be the best way to handle things. But for me personally, that belief of going on stage is everything, and smoking a couple of joints doesn't help. It does help, I should say, but it's like you gotta find a way to keep yourself even keel. I would say, tensions can run high, emotions can run low. Finding a way to tolerate everything and still find that love for what you do is the whole thing, I think. And for me, I wake up. Driving for me is therapy. I like to drive, so I'll usually take the driver's seat, get a couple Mountain Dews, a couple sodas, whatever, keep me feeling good, smoke a joint, make me chill out, and then showtime. I mean, what better schedule is that? You don't have to wake up for your 9 to 5. You get to go out and hang out with your friends and meet new people that are often, into the same things that you are and interested in what you're doing there, and connecting, man. I mean, it's like a party every night, whether it's, loud music and booze, or just sitting around a fire or sitting in the van. It's having a good time with other quality people. And I think people lose sight of that very easily.
I agree, and I've always thought it was quite sad as well because you mentioned the Sunset Strip earlier. What I loved about those particular sort of bands was they always came across as like a gang. I've had this
Yep.
discussion with a couple guys on the show already, but like they were a gang, dude, and it's what always appealed to me about bands. You were a gang of brothers, and for better or worse, you were going to do whatever it took. And what's sad is when you think how many bands get to that point, and you'll know because I mean you live this life, to get to that point where you can be on tours or you are doing this for, you know, finance, and this is your job, or you get to travel because of it, etc., etc., etc. That takes a lot of hard work. And so for a lot of these guys who get to that point and suddenly all decide that they hate each other, I've always thought it's so sad, man, because it's like it took so many years and so much work to get there. You achieved it, and now, like you said in your answer, it's like now you kind of just like you're ready to go home. Like, shit, man. Like, shouldn't you have thought
It's
about
weird,
that
for
before you
sure.
put in all this work? And I get it. People quit normal jobs, so I'm not saying you can't quit music or quit your band. I'm not saying that at all. It's just I've always thought it was so bizarre because, like, you spend years, sometimes decades, trying to get to that point, and you get to that point, and then you're just like, nah, I'm cool.
it, it's it's super bizarre, man. And it's funny. I was laying in bed earlier thinking about our interview, and it's just somewhere in my brain, I just started thinking about this guy that I was a fan of. He was a guitar player. His name was Casey Jones, and he played in this Australian band called De La Cruz. It's kind of like a modern day hair metal band, and I just remember growing up, like they, had a demo out. I was like, oh, this band's super cool. I hope they make it. And then they got a record deal and they put out this killer album, and then they just disappeared. And I always wondered what happened. And I had looked them up, and the guitar player, who was like the main guy, he was like, the music business is just not what I'm doing this for. I just want to play guitar, and the business turned me off, and he just dropped off the face of the earth, and I haven't heard anything about him. And it was just a random thought I had. And, it's a topic that I often talk about with many people. And it's like, people stop doing things, I think, too soon. You put your whole life into playing, into working up and making all these relationships, soon enough, you got a decade's worth of experience of all these things. And not to mention the thousands and thousands of dollars that a lot of people put into their own bands. I look at it as investing in yourself, right? Like you would with any business. You want to make money, so people are like, oh, we spent X amount of thousands of dollars making an album, but we didn't make it back in sales. It's like, you're not doing it to make money. You're doing it because you love it, and maybe you lost a few $1,000s on doing an album, but where did that album take you? Did it take you to new cities, on a new tour, and to new audiences? And did it introduce you to new people that can give you better opportunities? The time and the money is the investment. And I think the time is the biggest part of that, because I think right when bands start to get on that edge of like making or breaking, they kind of like, this is just not working out, and they stop just a little too soon. It's like you just got to do it long enough to allow it to be successful. And that was something that I heard George Lynch say many, many years ago in an interview, and it always stuck with me, man. It's people just stop. They say, oh, I'm 25, I got to get my life together. It's like, I literally heard somebody say that when I was in my early 20s, and they stopped playing. And I'm like, dude, if I had followed that, I would have never gotten here. And yeah, I'm older now and sacrificed a lot to get here, but, it just took time. And if you're willing to put that time in, there's no telling what people can do.
Couldn't agree more. Have you ever seen, I'm assuming you might have, but there's this kind of picture meme thing. I've seen it on Facebook and Instagram a couple times. It's like these two dudes they're digging for gold. And it's like the picture's split in two. And the one guy, he's like been digging for years, and there's like this massive hole, and he's about to give up. And just behind him, you can see it, there's gold. And the other guy just keeps going, even though he's not close. And it says something like, you never know how close you are before you give up or before you quit or whatever it says.
Yep.
But it sums up exactly what you just said in a picture. I should find it, and when I put this out, I'll link it so people can go check it out.
That's exactly true.
So here's a bit of a question purely for me, but I am going to include it in the interview. I saw that you played the Kiss Cruise. Mm-hmm. And I'm a massive Kiss fan, so I have to ask, did you manage to meet Gene or Paul?
I have met Gene before, not on the cruise. I had opened for his solo band once, and he was a character, of course. And I would say king of the one-liners, man. That guy can rip on anybody in the funnest setting, and he was cool. I have not met Paul, but he, along with, I would say, Tommy Thayer, I did see Eric Singer out a little bit. Paul was always out watching other bands on the cruise. It was crazy because, you'd think the guys from Kiss are going to hide. They don't want to be swarmed. And
Yeah.
sure enough, the one time I saw Gene on the boat, he was coming out of the elevator with about 100 people surrounding him, holding up vinyls and stuff, screaming his name.
Wow.
It's like the guy can't go anywhere without being hassled. But Paul, he would take the time to take pictures. He was watching the other bands. It was just cool to see. And you think with a band that big, they would just be like, whatever, who cares? It's our cruise. I'm just going to hang on the pool deck or, whatever. But they seem very down to earth. And, Tommy Thayer and Eric Singer, they're just hanging out with fans and other band members from other bands, in the lounges like it's nothing. And I think that's cool. And it was cool to see. But being a Kiss fan myself, man, the Kiss cruise was just next level. A lot of these cruises, like Monsters of Rock cruise and stuff, like they're very overwhelming because there's so many bands, so many personalities, so many people. The Kiss cruise was nice because it was honed in a little bit tighter. It was a little smaller of a boat, a little bit smaller of a crowd, less bands. You felt like you could do everything. And Kiss made you feel really special. Every day there was a Kiss related themed gift on the bed when you would come back to your room from breakfast or whatever. They were very accommodating on services and things like that. It was just a really nice experience. And as a fan, as you are, it was even better to be a part of that as an artist.
That's awesome, man. I always thought, again, just to go off on this Kiss tangent here for a couple minutes, but I always thought it was funny with Kiss how you take guys like Eric and Tommy, and they've both been in that band for over 20 years at this point. Yet, you've got those diehard Kiss fans that still won't kind of acknowledge them as members. And I get that they're wearing, Ace and Peter's makeup, but like, come on, man, those guys have more than paid their dues at this point. Like, they are totally members of that band as far as I'm concerned,
I agree. Tommy Thayer is great. I really enjoyed all the times I've seen Kiss over the years with him, especially on the boat. It's a little bit different of a show because you get to see them on a pool deck unmasked, and kind of raw, and then you see them in the theater with the gear on, but it's a smaller production, so it's really more about the playing and the performance. And when you see Kiss on a mega arena stage, you see lights, you see fireworks, confetti, all the shenanigans. But what you're there for, again, well, for me at least, is the music. So to see them on the cruise and to see them like really ripping up and still able to really pull all the stops with the music, it was a treat. And I kind of had forgotten about that. And again, Tommy Thayer is great, but Eric Singer, I mean, to say that this guy's not worthy of being an official member, I mean, have you seen the resume? The guy played with a million killer A-list bands.
Alice Cooper.
I mean, I couldn't think of Sabbath. I mean, forget it. I don't get how people want to just discredit them, and I get it from the super fan point, but it's just like ridiculous.
Yeah, it's totally ridiculous. I kind of get into these discussions with some of my musician friends every now and then, and it's like, I get it, we're all fans of certain things, and that nostalgic kind of factor plays a part. But sometimes I think people would be better off looking at some of this stuff like a business, as you've said, because sometimes some of these bands really are trying to push forward like a business. And
Sure.
some members in those bands, just like certain employees for certain businesses, are holding certain things back. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of everything Kiss related or everybody else's band. I'm just saying from my own experience, I've seen it. It's like sometimes you have to let somebody go. Sometimes that person might be you. You've got to be the one to go. But I think everybody kind of goes, oh man. I always used to find it with singers. You take bands like Alice in Chains or Fuel, or I mean, there's so many, man. Journey, when they
Van Halen.
Yeah, Van Halen. When they replace a singer, everybody's so quick to just hate on the band. But sometimes if you kind of take that nostalgic step, if you take that out of it and you look at what the band is actually doing, usually 9 times out of 10, at least with the examples that I've just mentioned, they they're actually still doing a really great job. And sometimes they just want to push forward as a band and they didn't have the opportunity, either through somebody dying or somebody having a certain vice and having to leave, or personality clash. And I think sometimes some of these, diehard fans, while they are very, very important, we couldn't live without them. I think sometimes they try and get too involved in the band's business. And like really, it's still a business. Just because it's a bunch of dudes playing guitar while they maybe have a beer on stage doesn't mean that they're all best friends.
Definitely not. Definitely. We've seen that with so many bands.
Yeah, it's kind of heartbreaking. All right, Jaron, what is the hardest thing you've ever had to learn as a musician? Now, I don't mean from a playing perspective. I mean like in your life as a musician.
Um, that's tough, man. I think the hardest thing I've had to learn is probably what we're kind of just talking about. It's parting with people that, when you're in a band and, it's not working out with a member, whether it's your best friend or just an acquaintance, it's really hard to confront that and to kind of find an easy way to let that situation, kind of figure itself out. If you're not willing to confront somebody with the issues and communicate the problems that are holding the band back, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So it kind of takes that person to step up and, address that. And I am a very non-confrontational person, at heart, but I'm usually the first one to see it in my head that something's not working. So while I do hold my tongue a lot, I have over the years had to speak up and make some of those calls, or take one for the team and be the one to bring it up. But just I think finding the right way to do that without losing a friendship, especially when I was younger. Most of my best friends were in my band, and when one guy was starting to let it go, it was like, someone's got to tell him, we can't do this anymore. No one wanted to step up, and it was just like week after week, it was just getting worse and worse. And I think just manning up and doing that, as much as it kind of felt awkward or hurt in a way, it kind of just taught me, that's the best thing you got to do. It's what's best for the band, not best, personally, because if you want to be friends with somebody, be friends with somebody, but you're going into business, so to speak, with a friend, that's a whole different thing. And they say never mix business with pleasure. And I do believe that, there is a way to do it, but it's not an easy thing to juggle.
Yeah. So let's flip it on its head. What's been the best piece of advice you've ever received in regards to your musical career?
That's funny, man. The best piece of advice I've ever gotten was from a buddy of mine, Chris Green. He played guitar for Taiketo, and he sat in with Firehouse for a little bit. He had I met him on this tour. I was filling in with this band called Dellacoma that I often do work with. Showed up, met him, and like a few days into this little tour we were doing, I'm sharing a room with him. I barely even know him, and I started to get kind of inklings about, this band Tantric needs somebody, would you be interested in doing it if you were asked? And like, I wasn't even really aware of Tantric. Like, I kind of knew the name, and once I heard Breakdown, I was like, I think I've heard this song before. I just kind of knew in my mind, this was my shot at taking it to the next level, playing with a band that was way bigger than anything I've ever done. And I was kind of just talking it through, kind of like I am now with you. And Chris just looked over me and goes, man, just say yes. Just say yes and figure the rest out later. It was more me saying, well, I'm only going to have 2 days to figure out 14 songs and quit my job that I've been working at for years, my full-time, corporate job, and leave for 6 weeks on a tour with people I've never even met or heard of, really. And then come home and, it's like, you just gave up your job for a 6-week tour. All those years of hard work and promotions are kind of out the window. Is it worth it? All these things. And honestly, it turned out to be the best advice ever, because you kind of just commit. Yeah, I'm the guy. You get your foot in the door, and then you show up and you just put the work in and you just do it. And I think too many people say, either to themselves or to the question, okay, let me think about it, or maybe, or this, they hesitate to think about it. But I think a lot of people talk themselves out of stuff or miss the opportunity because they wait too long. And so my best advice I think I've ever gotten was from Chris, and that was to just say yes and to figure out the rest, later on.
That's great advice, man. I think it's excellent.
Got to go for it.
Yeah, just go for it, man. And sink or swim, but you're probably going to swim, so cool.
Sure.
What's the best place for people to go to, or where's the best place for people to go to get hold of you if they want to kind of book you for anything, sessions or gigs, or just talk to you about bass or anything?
I'm pretty responsive on all the socials, man. I use Instagram and Facebook, I would say, the most. You can message people on either of those. Facebook's always good, kind of how we do, and I kind of treat my pages as pretty much strictly music for, like you would go to somebody's page if you're a Randy Rhoads freak and there's a Randy Rhoads site, you want to go look at pictures or videos. I kind of treat my pages like that, just kind of a place for people, if they're interested in me, they want to know about my music stuff, that's what my page is. It's music. I try not to get too personal on there. So I'm responsive like a business, man. I'm there and I'm happy to chat with anybody, and I'm always open to a good conversation or tips even, or someone give me some insights on some cool new gear or whatever it is. I'm always happy to chat.
That's awesome. Last question for you, Jaron.
Sure.
What's up with the Mountain Dew stuff?
Oh man, I can't shake it. It's just been a thing, man, since I was like 10 or 11. I got hooked on Mountain Dew and I can't stop drinking it. And it's become this whole thing throughout high school. The school tried to get my mom to stop buying me Mountain Dew. And then I got a job at a grocery store and I was stocking my locker with cans of Mountain Dew from the top to the bottom because they had banned soda in the schools, or I guess because of the sugar or whatever. So it was like all juice. By like my freshman year, they had soda. And then like 10th and 11th and 12th grade, there was no soda. So I became like the guy, for $1, you could come to my locker and grab a soda. And it's just kind of been like this thing that was like a joke. And now it's literally, I wake up, if I don't have a Mountain Dew by like 12 or 1 o'clock, like I'm miserable. And, that's kind of like a drug, I guess with caffeine. But, yeah, man. And now I have fans, almost every single show bringing me 12 packs. And I come home with loads of soda to stock up my house with. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, that's amazing as well. It's and look, there are way worse vices to have, right? So Mountain Dew all the way, man.
I know. It's like, it could be worse. It could be like, Jack Daniels or whatever. It's like, I'll just take a soda. I'm good.
That's awesome. Jaron, dude, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge, and just for taking the time to talk to us. I appreciate it, and I'm sure our listeners are going to appreciate it too. And I look forward to possibly talking to you again in the future, man.
Yeah, hopefully we can do some gigs in the future as well.
Let's do it, dude. Let's do it. I'm down.
All right, man. Thanks for having me.
Bye. Sweet. Another episode done and dusted. I want to thank you if you are continuing to listen to these. I hope you are getting something from them. I want to thank Jaron for his time and his wisdom and his insight. I know I say it every damn episode, but conversations like these are gold, if you're willing to look past the surface and just take the information you need. These are lessons for musicians that sometimes we don't learn the easy way. My name is Travis Mark. You can find out more about me at travismark.com. You can find out more about Musicians Mentor at musicians-mentor.com. Please continue to rate and review this podcast. That helps us. But until next time, keep doing your thing, work hard, enjoy yourself. Peace.